Hi, it's Alistair at Electric Scotland. Just to be doing my introduction, my weekly newsletter for June 21st, 2019. Just to say we've had the kind of final battle for the Conservative Party. It's now down to just the two candidates who now go forward to the final stage, which is when the Conservative members vote. And it's between Boris Johnson and Jeremy Hunt. Jeremy Hunt beat third place Michael Gove by just 2 votes. I'm glad they didn't pick Michael Gove because he's a weasel and you can't trust him. And I think, quite frankly, I looked at an old article in 2016 and I think it was the BBC highlighted the fact that Michael Gove would always have problems on trust because he basically backstabbed Boris Johnson when Theresa May actually won the Conservative election last time round. So Michael Gove is really getting his comeuppance, you might say, for his traitorous behaviour. So anyway, you can't trust the guy, so I'm glad he's not in the final 2. I think it's going to say probably by the end of July we'll get the result, somewhere around about that time. Okay, so anyway, that's the kind of major news story. It's been going on all week because I've had to whittle it down from, 10 I think, down to the last 2. Okay, first story I've got for you this week is tremendous effort sees planting target met for the first time. It says about 11,200 hectares of new planting was undertaken last year, a significant increase on 2017. Trees, lots of trees being planted, that's good stuff. I think, if I remember rightly, the Ontario government decided to withdraw funding for the tree planting in Ontario, but the federal government decided that they would fund the money to continue the project, so that was good as well. Okay, next story is, I'm delighted, says Fife Baker, as scone is named the best in Scotland. It says official, Scotland's best scones hail from Courier County, and it's all thanks to family-run bakers from Fife's East Nook. Actually, if you've never been to the East Nook, you should Google it on my site or use a search engine for East Nook, because it's a place you normally bypass because people are going like from Dunfermline area straight to St Andrews, and so you bypass the East Nook totally. And East Nook is opposite Edinburgh. But I spent a couple of months there and I took tons of pictures and everything. So you might like to have a wee look at my site for that. And I've got, while I was there, I found a very good history of East Nook. And so I've embedded the history of each of the towns that I profiled there with the history from the book. So it's a good combination. Okay, on to Britain is in pretty good shape for a no-deal Brexit. It says Sir Mark Sedwill said preparations for the UK crashing out of the EU without an agreement were among the most impressive pieces of cross-government work he had seen. So that's encouraging. And Scotland's crannogs are older than Stonehenge. Is the next story. It says archaeologists have discovered that some Scottish crannogs are thousands of years older than previously thought. So that's again a very interesting story. I went to one of the crannogs, fantastic places. They built a replica of one of the crannogs. It's near the River Tay, Aberfeldy I think it is. Brilliant. If you're in Scotland you should really go there. Okay, next story is BBC News must ignore false claims of Brexit bias and re-establishes authority. It says Brexit has been a disaster for the BBC. And it absolutely had. You can't trust them. And one of the elections, the election debates with the leaders of the Conservative Party, it's just been hammered as the worst possible interviewing that the BBC has done in many a year. Clearly, its pro-Brexit stance was at total odds with the Conservative people who basically want out. So you might want to read that story. Millions of Canadians cheer Toronto Raptors in NBA victory parade. It says Toronto Raptors given key to the city at victory rally. Some good pictures there as well. That's to be the big story this week in Canada. Heathrow reveals expansion master plan. The plan includes diverting rivers, moving roads, and rerouting the M25 through a tunnel under the new runway. So quite some construction work to go on there. So you might want to keep your eye on that. Next one is Scottish alcohol sales drop as minimum price kicks in. It says analysis by NHS Health Scotland found Scottish adults still bought more alcohol than people in England and Wales on average, but the gap narrowed. They're still trying to figure out if this is going to be a benefit or not, but certainly it's affecting sales for sure. And one of the wee stories in that was the fact that there's a small off-license, a kind of grocer off-license wee business, and he said his sales have gone up very well indeed on the alcohol side, because now the minimum price means he's on par with the big supermarkets, whereas he didn't used to be. So he's benefited from that. Next story, a simpler explainer about Article XXIV of the GATT. Said there seems to be a lot of misunderstanding flying around about Article 24 of the Geneva Agreement on Tariffs and Trades in 1994. GATT is one of the main WTO agreements and relates to trade in goods. So that's an explainer. So those that are interested in that, hopefully you'll get all the information you need. That came from Lawyers for Britain, by the way. Then the Royal Highland Show 2019, it says more than 1,000 exhibitors and 2,150 livestock competitors are taking part in this year's Royal Highland Show at the outskirts of Edinburgh. Some great pictures there, so I've given you a link to that story, which is on the BBC. Nothing in Scotsman about it, fun enough. Anyway, MSPs miss the bigger pictures. The next story, this is from Sceptical Scott. It says the annual Scottish budget contains lots of detail on spending priorities for the coming year. Then let's make the special relationship great again. The special relationship is about trade, security, and so much more. This is obviously the special relationship between the USA and the UK, so again, you might like to have a read of that. And the final story I picked for you is, then there were two. Johnson and Hunt fight for the British PM job. Okay, now on to Electric Canadian. The Canadian Horticulturalist. I got volume 31 up, 1908. Then a book, Among the Canadian Alps, by Lawrence J. Burpee, is produced in 1914. And it's a really good, I certainly enjoyed reading the book, so hope you will as well. Some fantastic places to go in Canada, that's for sure. Then I found Bushcraft Canadian Scout Manual. It says the skills and knowledge of bushcraft are some of the key elements in the Army Cadet training program. So I thought you might enjoy that. Then the Canadian Nurse, This is owned and published monthly by the Canadian National Association of Trained Nurses. This is, I've actually brought you volume 14, issue 11. This was November 1918, at the end of the war, in which training is featured. And I've added this to our magazine page with a link to another 200 plus issues, which can be found on our, as I say, in our magazine page. It's towards the bottom. The next one for Canada is The Leader, a guide to being a successful non-commissioned officer in the army. And actually anyone that's interested in leading a team, being a sales manager or even an office manager role, something like that, it's well worth reading, because what they write about, as far as the army is concerned, is very practical. And anyone looking for a leadership role would be, well advised to have a wee read of that. Okay, next one is Canadian Camp Life. It was by Francis E. Hemming. It was produced in 1900. Again, it's an interesting story. Then finally, Profiling Rod Myers of RM Classic Cards. I've actually added this to my Canadian journal, because in the Chatham Voice, which is the free newspaper that comes out each week in Chatham here, I've always been aware that he's quite a character. So I've given you a wee story about him, and also I took some photographs of a few pages from the Voice and popped them up as pictures onto the page. So hopefully you might like to have a wee read of that. We've got the big fest going on this week. He's doing a big sponsorship event in Chatham. Everyone can get involved, all kinds of things going on. And apparently he might have Jay Leno up as one of his special guests, because clearly he deals with a lot of multi-millionaires that have beautiful old cars that need being looked after. Okay, then on to Electorate Scotland. I'm giving you a lot of reading this time around. First is the National Tribune. This was the premier Union veterans newspaper and the post-Civil War era. It was launched in 1877. I found 2 of the scrapbooks with loads of stories in them. So if you Americans would enjoy reading those. And then The Old Lieutenant and His Son. This is a 2-volume one written by Norman MacLeod, who was the editor of Good Words. And if you remember reading Good Words, tons of stories in there. But Norman MacLeod was chaplain to the Queen Victoria, and she highly rated him. And he wrote several books, of which we've got a few up on the site, and a big biography about him as well, written by his brother. So I thought I'd add this Old Lieutenant and His Son. And I actually read the 2 volumes this week, which is probably why I didn't get too much done, because there's a lot of reading I was doing this week. Just happened to start it and enjoyed it and worked my way through the 2 volumes. Okay. The next one is The Night Lamp. It says, means by which spiritual darkness was dispelled from the deathbed of Agnes Maxwell McFarlane. That's by the Reverend John McFarlane, produced in 1851. It's his 2nd edition, and obviously he's writing about his sister. So it's apparently in the reviews they said a lot of people found a lot of comfort from reading this, so I thought I'd bring it to you. And then the Buckhannon Banner. I got the July 2019 issue in. It's a quarterly newsletter, and they're discussing about how there's a special event on because they've now elected a chief. And the Lord Lion is going to be coming to the event, and everyone's invited. There's not a lot of sitting rooms, but you're welcome to come and stand. So it's all in the Buckhannon Banner, how to get involved in that. The next story is Northern Folklore. It's on wells and water, an account of some interesting wells in the neighbourhood of Inverness and the north. It's by Alex Fraser, produced in 1878. And also I've got two stories for you, both with the same title, Nick of the Woods. It's a story of the early settlers in Kentucky by Robert Montgomery Bird, which was produced in 1880. When I was trying to find the publishing date of this book, I went back to the archives to find the entry for it, and that's how I got the date. But when I was looking for Nick of the Woods, I actually found another book with the same title. This time it's by Alaska Blacklock. It's a pseudonym for George Edward Lewis, which was produced in 1916. So both are different topics, but they're both very interesting books. So I thought I'd just bring them both, actually. That's what I mean. There's a whole ton of reading this time around. They are novels, but based on historical fact. And sometimes they're easier to read than pure history. Okay, and then the story I've got for you this week is Scotland urged to invest in nuclear to hit climate goals. It's by Reverend Carroll, and it was written for the Guardian newspaper. So I've extracted that story because I think it makes a lot of sense. What they're saying is, with new technology and everything, smaller nuclear plants are actually very cost effective and very safe and very green. So they're highlighting this in the report, so I thought you might like to read about it. Okay, and so that's it for this week. So, hope you enjoy your read, and as always, I'd love to hear any comments or suggestions you've got for the newsletter. Because, I kind of work in a vacuum most times, so it's nice to know if you're liking anything in particular. Like I mentioned last week, do you like the story, or do you not like the story, or do you read the story? I don't know if you read it or not. But if I don't get feedback, I won't know what you like and don't like. So I can't really make any changes unless I just feel I need to make a change. So I'm not sure about whether the story should continue or whether I should just leave it and keep the newsletter a bit shorter. So anyway, any comments, thoughts, suggestions, or even some help, if you happen to know of an old history book you think our people would like, then let me know where to get a copy, and I'll do my best to find it. Okay, anyway, that's it for this week. So, hope you have a good weekend when it comes. Take care. Bye-bye.